There's something in the water." Eli Morgan didn't look up from the net he was mending. His 9-year-old son, Noah, stood on the edge of the dock, pointing toward the gray swell of morning tide rolling in beneath the fog. "You say that every week," Eli muttered, pulling the twine tighter. "This time, it's not a log." "Or a seal," Noah said, his voice lowering. "It's a person." That made Eli look. At first, all he saw was the way the sun struggled to rise behind the clouds, just enough light to cut silver into the mist. Then he saw it a shape tangled in drift and seaweed, slowly bobbing closer with each gentle lap of the waves. Eli dropped the net and ran. The dock groaned under his boots. Behind him, Elsie, his daughter Noah's twin, called out, "Is it someone drowning?" But her voice felt far away like everything else that morning. The water was frigid as he waded in, grabbing the edge of the small, overturned skiff. It was old, cracked along the sides, and inside, half submerged, was a woman. She was unconscious, her lips tinged blue, her fingers locked around a soaked canvas bag pressed tight to her chest. Salt clung to her eyelashes like frost. "Ma'am," Eli said, shaking her gently. "Hey, can you hear me?" She didn't move. "Dad." Noah called. "Should I call Doc Lang number blanket?" "Now." He hoisted her over his shoulder. She was lighter than she should have been. That worried him more than the bruise peeking from beneath her sleeve. Eli didn't speak again until they reached the porch of the house he'd built 10 years ago, back when he still believed hard work could fix a broken heart. He laid her gently on the bench near the firewood stack, pressing 2 fingers to her neck. A heartbeat. Faint, but there. "Izzy," the woman whispered, barely audible. "Don't. Take the bag." Eli looked down. The soaked canvas sack in her arms was marked with 2 things, a single red thread stitched into the hem, and the faint smell of bread dough. 20 minutes later, the woman Izzy was wrapped in every dry quilt Eli could find and laid out on the old leather couch near the hearth. The fire crackled low, battling against the cold still clinging to her bones. "She's waking up," Elsie whispered, kneeling by the sofa. Izzy's eyelids fluttered, then opened slowly. Her gaze flicked across the room, wooden beams, shelves stacked with mason jars, a fishing rod by the door, then landed on Eli. "I'm not dead," she croaked, more surprised than grateful. "Nope," Eli said, leaning on the kitchen counter, arms crossed. "You washed up next to my crab traps," which I'm not thrilled about, by the way. Her lips twitched, almost a smile, but it faded fast. She sat up too quickly and winced. "Easy," he said. "You took in some water. And there's a bruise on your shoulder that looks a week old. I don't suppose you want to talk about it?" "No," she said flatly, pulling the blanket tighter around herself. Figured. There was a pause, the kind that crackles louder than firewood. "Where am I?" she asked. "Southport, Maine, a little outside of town." "You're in my house. Name's Eli Morgan. That's Noah. And the small tornado with curls is Elsie." Elsie waved. "You smell like bread." Izzy looked down at the damp bag still clutched in her lap, its sourdough starter, old. "Named her Frances." Noah wrinkled his nose. "You named your bread." "It's not bread yet," Izzy muttered, defensive. "And yes, she saved my life more than once." "Cool," Elsie said sincerely. Eli let the silence settle again, watching the woman in front of him. There was something too calm about her, like someone who'd practiced hiding fear for years. "You need a place to stay?" he asked. Izzy looked up, startled. "I didn't say you didn't have to. There's a guest room through that door. Not fancy, but dry. You can rest. Tomorrow you can tell me what you're running from. Or not. I don't take kindly to trouble, but I take even less kindly to people left to drown." Izzy stared at him for a long time. "You're not asking questions. I've lived long enough to know the answers come when they're ready." That seemed to hit something in her. Her eyes shimmered just a little, but no tears fell. "I can cook," she said. "Bake, mostly. I've worked in real kitchens." Eli nodded slowly. "This house runs on pie. You bake, you stay. Deal." That night, long after the kids had gone to bed, Eli found her standing in the kitchen barefoot in one of his late wife's old flannel shirts. She was kneading dough like it owed her money fists, pressing deep into the flour like she was trying to forget something through force alone. "You don't sleep?" he asked. "Not well." Eli leaned on the doorframe. "You always run toward storms." I didn't run toward it. The storm just caught up. He nodded. "Funny thing about storms. They always do." Izzy glanced at him then for the first time, really looking. There was grief in his face, but not sharp, just worn like an old boot. Comfortable. Honest. She motioned toward the dough. "It's saltwater pie. My mother used to say it cures heartache." "Does it?" Izzy smiled, small and real. "Depends how broken the heart is." Eli stepped forward, lifted the corner of a dish towel, and placed it gently over the dough. "Well," he said quietly, "let's give it time to rise." And for the first time in a long, long while, so did she. The scent of warm bread drifted through the house like a memory salt and crust tang and butter. It was a smell that softened walls and quieted ghosts. And for a few brief hours, the Morgan home felt like something out of an old country song, safe, warm, whole. Until Elsie found the knife. "Dad," she said, poking her head into the workshop, "why does Miss Izzy keep a knife under her pillow?" Eli turned away from the plank he was sanding. "What a knife," Elsie repeated. "Like a kitchen one, but small. Sharp." She said it was for apples, but she looked scared when I asked. Eli wiped his hands on a rag and exhaled through his nose. He didn't answer right away. Just walked past his daughter, patted her head gently, and headed toward the house. Izzy was at the sink, sleeves rolled, washing a mixing bowl, with the precision of someone who'd been trained, not just to cook, but to do it perfectly. Her eyes flicked up when Eli entered. I locked the back door. "Now," she said before he could speak, "and I sleep with the chair propped under the knob. Just habit. You sleep with a blade, too." His voice wasn't accusing, just low. "Careful." She dried her hands, folding the towel slowly, deliberately. Some people carry trauma in their voice, others in their fists. Me, I carry it in my kitchen. He didn't move. "You planning on using it?" "Only if someone comes through the door I didn't open." She looked at him, eyes steady. "I've been followed before, Eli. You want me gone, I get it. But don't treat me like a threat just because I'm trying not to die." That stopped him cold. Her words hung in the air like the smell of burnt sugar, unexpected, bitter. "I'm not asking you to explain everything," he said quietly. "Just, if there's something coming after you, I need to know what's headed for my front porch." Izzy turned to the window, watching the wind toy with the clothesline. "Fear doesn't always arrive with headlights," she whispered. "Sometimes it comes wrapped in charm. A smile too wide, a hand too still. And by the time you realize the wolf was already inside, it's too late to lock the door." Eli said nothing for a long time. Then, softly, "That why you flinch when the kettle whistles," her shoulders tensed, "and why you always stir with your left hand, even when your right is stronger." She nodded. "You see a lot," she murmured. "I lost my wife because I didn't. I won't make that mistake again." They stood in silence, the kind that holds truth instead of avoiding it. Later that afternoon, Eli found Noah crouched under the porch, fiddling with a slingshot and muttering under his breath. "Everything okay down there?" Eli asked. "She jumps when I slam the screen door," Noah said. So I stopped slamming it. But then she said, "Thank you," like I saved her life or something, and I didn't know what to say. Eli crouched beside him, You said, "You're welcome," right? I said, "Do you want to see my fort?" Noah shrugged, and she laughed, but not like a funny laugh, more like a "thank you for pretending things are normal" kind of laugh. Eli looked toward the kitchen window, where Izzy was wiping down the counter again. "Son," he said, "sometimes the bravest thing you can do for someone is pretend normal for them. It's like holding the curtain up so they can breathe behind it." Noah stared at him. "That's kinda poetic for a fisherman, Dad." Eli smirked. "Don't let it get around." That evening the wind came in strong from the bay, and with it the first real chill of fall. Izzy lit the oven not to bake, but for the heat, and the house filled with the sound of flames and metal expanding. She sat at the kitchen table, hands wrapped around a mug, eyes distant. "You ever heard of saltwater pie?" she asked almost too casually. Eli, sitting across from her, raised a brow. "I ate it once in Georgia. Tasted like homesickness." "That's the point," she said. "It's a pie made when there's nothing left in the cupboard, but flour, lard, and tears. You make it because life demands beauty even when it gives you nothing to work with. You bake philosophy into everything." She smiled, but her eyes didn't. "No, just the stuff I want to remember." She stood, pulled out a mixing bowl, and began working. Noah and Elsie hovered near the table watching. "Can we help Izzy?" hesitated. Then, "Yes. Wash your hands, and tell me the saddest thing that ever made you feel better." Elsie blinked. "What, it's a rule," Izzy said, already tossing flour. "Saltwater pie only works if you feed it truth." Noah grinned. "I broke Mom's music box once. Cried for a week. Then Dad told me she probably would have laughed." Izzy nodded. "That's a good start," Elsie whispered. "I saw Dad cry last Christmas, when he thought we were sleeping. That made me love him more." Eli looked away, clearing his throat. Izzy reached out and gently tapped the dough. "That'll make it rich." Eli watched her, then not just her hands, but the way she stood taller when flour clung to her sleeves, the way the fear faded from her eyes. When the kids asked questions, she didn't have to dodge. She was healing. And he was watching it happen, one cup of flour at a time. That night, after the kids went to bed, Eli stepped outside to lock the barn. The moon was thin, the stars quiet. From the edge of the property just past the wood line, he saw it. Tracks. Fresh. Boot prints. Not his. Not Noah's. They led to the back of the house and stopped beneath the kitchen window. Eli's blood turned cold. He didn't run. He walked back inside, locked the door behind him, and checked the windows twice. When he passed through the kitchen, Izzy was cleaning the pie pan, humming something low and broken. He didn't say a word, but he laid his hand gently on the back door and whispered to no one in particular, "Next time knock," and the fire crackled like it agreed. It was still dark when Eli found her on the porch. Izzy sat cross-legged, wrapped in a flannel blanket, her breath fogging in the cold morning air. The sun hadn't yet breached the hills, and the only sound was the distant hum of waves against the rocks below. She didn't flinch when he approached. "I made coffee," he said, holding out a steaming mug. "It's strong enough to wake the dead." "Perfect," she said, taking it with both hands. For a moment they didn't speak. The world around them held its breath. Then Izzy exhaled. "I suppose it's time you knew." Eli sat down beside her. "Not too close, not too far. Only if you're ready." "I'm not," she said softly, "but I've run out of places to hide." She took a sip, staring into the trees like they held the memory she was about to drag up. "I was a chef on a private yacht," she began, "the St. Coral. 5-star menu crystal chandeliers, the kind of guests who care more about wine pairings than people." Eli didn't interrupt. "I got hired because I worked fast, clean, and didn't ask questions. And for a while that suited me just fine. I baked my pies. I kept my head down. Her fingers tightened around the mug. But you learn to recognize patterns in heat. A pie burns the same way every time. So does fear. She looked over at him then. They kept the lower deck locked. Said it was for supplies. I didn't question it. Not at first. But then I started noticing things. Too many meals. Names that never came topside cleaning schedules that didn't make sense. I asked. Got warned. I asked again. Got hit. Eli's jaw clenched. He didn't speak, but his silence was thunder. Eventually, I picked the lock. Her voice was brittle now. It wasn't supplies, Eli. It was people. Dozens of them. Kids, women packed into metal rooms like boxes of cargo. She blinked hard. I threatened to go to the Coast Guard. The owner laughed. Said if I tried, I'd end up at the bottom of the bay and no one would notice. Or care. Did anyone help you? A deckhand. Sweet kid named Raoul. He slipped me into a skiff during a storm and said, if you reach land, find firewood and salt. That's where good people live. She gave a soft laugh. So I followed the smell of pie and smoke. Found your dock instead. Eli looked down at his boots. I'm sorry, he said. Don't be. I'd do it again. Her voice for the first time held iron. I couldn't keep baking bread while people starved below deck. I couldn't keep seasoning food while women prayed not to be touched. She turned to him. Would you have stayed quiet? No, Eli said. But I've learned it's easier to fight for others than to fight for yourself. Izzy nodded, her eyes softer now. Maybe that's why we're both still standing. Inside, the kids were waking up. The scent of bacon danced into the hallway. Izzy moved through the kitchen like she belonged there, flipping eggs and telling Noah to set the table while Elsie braided her hair. Eli watched from the doorway. There was something unspoken in the way she placed each plate, like she was building a life one breakfast at a time. You're different today, he said, when she passed him the butter. I remembered who I was before I got scared. And who was that? She smiled. Someone who knew how to make a crust that doesn't fall apart. That afternoon, Eli headed down to the dock. The tide was low and gulls screamed overhead. He bent down to check the crab traps and stopped. Footprints. Not his. Not Izzy's. Not the kids'. Fresh ones, two booted deep and stopping right at the edge of the dock. He followed them back, slowly, stomach sinking. One set. One direction. Someone had come. Someone had watched. Someone had left. Back at the house, Izzy was shelling peas with Elsie. Her sleeves were rolled high despite the chill revealing the faded bruises that hadn't yet disappeared. When Eli came in, she looked up immediately. Something wrong, she asked. Eli glanced at the children, then back at her. Not here. Step outside with me. She followed without a word. When they reached the barn, he stopped. There were tracks, he said. Someone came right up to the dock, her face drained of color. Did they see the house? Maybe. Maybe more. You think they're looking for you? I don't think she said. I know. Eli crossed his arms. Then it's time we stopped waiting for them to knock. Izzy turned away, gripping the barn door like it could hold her up. He won't stop, Eli. The man who owns that yacht, he has money friends in the right places. He's the kind of man who gets invited to charity galas after buying girls in bulk. Eli's voice dropped quiet and dangerous. Then maybe it's time someone gave him a reason to lose sleep. That evening, Izzy stood at the counter slicing apples with the same knife Elsie had found under her pillow. Eli came in, wiping his hands on a towel. You still carrying that habit? He paused. Mind if I sharpen it for you? She looked at him unsure. I sharpen tools I care about, he added. Keeps them strong. Safe. She handed it over without a word. And in that silent gesture, trust passed like a baton between runners. The stars were out when she found him in the shed, hammering extra locks into the back doors. The kids were asleep. The dog snored softly by the hearth. "You're preparing," she said. Eli didn't look up. "You don't run from fire," he murmured. "You build a bigger one, so it knows whose land it's on." Izzy stepped closer. "I never asked you why you're still alone." He set the hammer down gently. "My wife died 6 years ago," he said. Fever took her fast. One day we were arguing about fence posts, the next she was gone. "I'm sorry. She was the kind who believed the world could still be kind. I used to think she was naive. Now I think she was brave." Izzy placed a hand on the workbench. "Maybe people like that are what keep the rest of us going." Eli looked up at her eyes steady. "Maybe people like you remind the rest of us we've still got fight left." The fire burned low in the living room. Izzy sat alone, a pie cooling on the windowsill, the scent drifting like a lullaby into every corner of the house. She closed her eyes and whispered into the silence. Let them come. Not as a dare, but as a promise. She was done running. This time, she'd stand. The bell above the bakery door rang like a chime at a funeral, too sharp, too sudden. Izzy didn't turn immediately. She had flour on her arms, a bowl under one elbow, and pie crust spread like a canvas on the oak counter. It was Tuesday morning, the slowest day of the week. Locals knew to come on Fridays when her peach and cardamom pie made its silent appearance on the menu board. The man who entered didn't smell like sea air or wood smoke. He didn't move like someone who'd ever hauled crab traps or fixed a busted fence. His boots were polished, his coat too clean for this town. His smile, the kind that had teeth. "Smells like home in here," he said, casually brushing a speck of imaginary dust off his sleeve. Izzy felt her hand, still breath hitching in her throat. She didn't need to turn. The voice was enough. She looked up slowly. "We're closed on charm." The man laughed. Not loud. Not real. "That's no way to greet a paying customer," he said, stepping forward. "What's the special?" Eli appeared from the back, like he'd risen out of the woodwork itself, quiet, broad-shouldered calm in the way a storm sometimes is before it hits. "She said we're closed," Eli replied. The man turned. His eyes flicked over Eli like he was measuring the size of the obstacle. Then he smiled again. "I'm just passing through. Thought I'd grab a pie for the road." "You'll find what you need at Betty's Cafe down the road," Eli said, voice even. "They've got plenty for people just passing through." A pause. The man tipped his hat slowly, deliberately. Then he placed a crisp $100 bill on the counter. Beside it, he left a small square piece of paper. Izzy didn't move. He turned to go, but before stepping out the door, he looked back. "Tell Francis I said hello." Then he was gone, and the warmth in the bakery died like a candle in the wind. Eli picked up the piece of paper. It was blank, until he tilted it toward the light. There, faintly embossed in red ink, "Found you." Izzy was already backing toward the kitchen. "I need air," she said, barely a whisper. Eli followed her outside. She stood by the woodpile, arms crossed over her chest, staring at nothing. "Who is he?" he asked gently. "One of his men," she answered. "The one who owns the yacht. He never comes himself. Always sends pretty faces and polished boots." "Did he know your name?" Izzy shook her head. He knew Francis. Eli blinked. "The starter?" She nodded, a bitter laugh escaping her lips. Of all the things to track, they followed a bowl of bacteria. "You left more than dough behind, didn't you?" "I left the truth." She looked at him, eyes glinting. "And people like him don't like truth. They prefer silence, prefer shadows." I lit a match in the dark, Eli. Now they're trying to blow it out. That night, Eli double-bolted every door. He moved the kids' beds into his room, told them it was a sleepover storm drill, and they laughed like it was a game. He taught them how to lock the windows, how to call Sheriff Tannen if anything happened. He didn't say why. He didn't need to. Izzy sat in the kitchen with a shotgun across her lap and a loaf of sourdough cooling on the sill. "I'm bringing trouble to your door," she said. "No," Eli replied. "You're bringing truth. Trouble was already out there, waiting." She looked down at her hands. "You don't know what he's capable of. I don't need to. I know what we're capable of. And I'd rather stand beside someone brave than sit safely next to someone who's silent." She didn't reply, but her grip on the shotgun eased. The next morning, Eli walked the property, checked the barn, checked the dock, found nothing, until he reached the mailbox. There, nailed into the wooden post, was an envelope. No address, no return. Just one line scrawled in familiar looping cursive. "You're not worth dying for, Ruth." He read it once, then again. The name froze him. "Ruth," he whispered. He hadn't known it. Until now. She hadn't told him. Hadn't told anyone. Back inside, he laid the letter on the kitchen table. Izzy stared at it for a long time before picking it up. Her hands didn't shake. Her voice didn't break. But her eyes. God, her eyes. "They know who I was," she said, "which means they know where I am." Eli pulled out a chair. "So we plan, and we fight, and we stand." Izzy's lip trembled. "You still want me here? I want truth. I want courage in my home. And I want my kids to grow up knowing that kindness isn't weakness, and that family is made, not just born." She stared at him. And for the first time in weeks, the storm in her eyes gave way to something else. Hope. That night, Eli stood on the porch, shotgun resting beside him, moonlight glinting off its barrel. Izzy stepped out, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders. "They'll come again," she said. "Then they'd better bring more than words," he said. She looked at him. "Why are you doing this for me?" He didn't look at her, just stared into the dark. "Because I've already lost one woman to silence. I won't lose another to fear." Then softer, he added, "Besides, I think this town's had enough cowards." She smiled barely. And beside her, the pie on the windowsill steamed into the night air scent, drifting like a warning or a promise. This home fights back. Eli stood at the edge of the barn holding a rake in one hand and a memory in the other. The tracks were back. He'd seen them just past the chicken coop, deep, deliberate boots that didn't belong to anyone on his land. They looped near the pantry window, then vanished into the tree line. Same size, same pattern. This time, they weren't just watching. They were measuring. Inside, Izzy was stringing a clothesline through the kitchen, beams odd given the dryer worked just fine. Noah and Elsie watched from the doorway, curious. "What's that for?" Noah asked. "Trap," she said, simply tying the twine tight. "If someone tries to sneak in through here again, they're going to meet my grandmother's clothespins in the dark." Elsie giggled. "That doesn't sound very scary." Izzy grinned without looking. "Oh, it's not about scaring. It's about knowing." She stepped down from the chair and brushed her hands on her apron. "Every noise is a conversation if you're quiet enough to hear it." Eli entered through the back door, mud still on his boots. "We've got company." Again. Izzy didn't ask how he knew. She just nodded. "We need more than traps," Eli said. "We need witnesses, a paper trail, some kind of protection beyond hammers and shotguns." Izzy sat down at the kitchen table, fingers threading together. "I filed a report months ago, under an alias. Nothing happened." "That was then," Eli said. "Now you're not alone." The next morning, Izzy walked into the Southport post office, her name signed on a plain white envelope. Inside 5 pages of testimony, photos of bruises, a ship registry from the St. Coral, and a copy of the note that had been nailed to the mailbox. She mailed it to 3 places, Don Torres 1, the U.S. Coast Guard Office, Portland. 2, a federal task force on human trafficking in D.C. 3, and Sheriff Tannen's personal inbox. As she slid the envelopes through the slot, she whispered to herself, "Let them chase me now with law at their heels." That evening, Eli gathered the kids around the table and pulled out an old map of the property. "What are we doing?" Elsie asked, crayon already in hand. "We're building a fort," Eli said. "But we already have one," Noah replied. "This one's real," Izzy added from the kitchen. "One that keeps people in and the wrong people out." For 2 hours, the four of them worked like a little militia, assigning safe zones, planning exits, marking the old barn as a fallback point. Izzy taught Noah how to pack salt and sugar into jars that could double as deterrents. "It's not about fighting dirty," she told him. "It's about surviving clean." Noah blinked. "That's kind of brilliant." Izzy winked. Most bakers are. At dusk, the phone rang. Not the landline, the old rotary that only rang when Tannen called. Eli answered. "Morgan here." "It's Tannen. We got the envelope. She sent it." "Didn't she?" "She did. Tell her she's got grit. I'm forwarding it to my contact at the state office." But I'll be honest, Eli, men like the one behind this, they don't go down easy. Money makes shadows. Eli's voice hardened. "Then we bring light." A pause. "Watch your back," Tannen said quietly. "If he knows you're sheltering her, you're not just in danger. You're a message waiting to be sent." Eli hung up without a word, then turned to find Izzy standing in the hallway, having heard every word. She didn't cry, didn't crumble. She just walked to the stove, stirred the pot of chowder simmering low, and said, "Then we'd better make the message count." That night, after the kids had gone to bed, Eli stood by the wood stove, sipping coffee that had long since gone cold. Izzy sat nearby, folding napkins, with the kind of focus reserved for people who once had nothing but control over the small things. "I never meant to bring war to your home," she said quietly. "It's not war," he replied. "It's a reckoning." She smiled at that, then whispered, "Do you ever wonder how much of yourself you've lost just to stay standing?" "All the time," he said. "But I also wonder how much I've gained because I didn't fall." She looked at him for a long time. "You really believe people like us can win?" "I don't know if we win," he said. "But we don't lose quietly. That I promise." Later, after midnight, Eli walked the perimeter with a flashlight and a loaded rifle. The clouds were low, moonlight thin. He paused near the fence where he'd seen the tracks. There, tucked under a stone, was a new piece of paper. No words, just a symbol. A red X. He pocketed it. Didn't wake her. But when he came inside, he moved the kids into the hallway and laid a mattress between their doors. He didn't sleep. He listened. To every creak, every shift in the wind. Because storms weren't coming. They were already here. And in the stillness before dawn, as the fire in the hearth burned low and soft, Izzy whispered to herself, barely audible, as if not for anyone else. They chased a baker into a corner. They forgot what happens when flour meets fire. Crash. The sound shattered the silence like a bullet through glass. Eli's eyes snapped open. The kids were screaming. The kitchen window was gone. He bolted upright, grabbed the shotgun from the floor, and burst into the hallway, heart thundering. "Izzy!" he shouted. "I'm here!" she called from the kitchen, breathless voice, hard with fear, not panic. He skidded around the corner in time to see her duck behind the island, just as a second brick sailed through the window landing with a sickening thunk into the cabinets. Boots, 3 of them. Bigger than the night. Black masks, crowbars, no hesitation. They were already inside. Eli didn't wait. The first shot wasn't lethal rock salt from an old farm gun meant to sting blind, send a message. The man closest to him howled, clutching his face, blood and salt burning into his eyes. Another rushed toward Izzy. Big mistake. She reached for the baking rack, flipped the entire thing down with force, sending cast iron skillets, and a full jar of sourdough starter crashing into his chest. He stumbled back, dazed. The third man advanced, but Duke, their golden retriever, wasn't having it. With a growl unlike anything the dog had ever made, he lunged sinking teeth into the man's leg and dragging him to the floor. Back door, Eli barked. "Push him out!" Izzy grabbed a sack of flour, tossed it like a grenade. Boom! Clouds of white exploded into the air, coating the room in chaos. The third intruder slipped, hit the table hard. "Stay down," Eli shouted, aiming the barrel. All three men stumbled, disoriented, coughing, bleeding, but only two made it out the door. The third, he groaned on the floor, Duke snarling at his throat. Eli pinned him down with a knee to the chest. "Don't move." Sirens wailed in the distance, closer than expected. Tannen had heard the gunshot. Thank God. 15 minutes later, the farmhouse was lit up like a carnival. Sheriff Tannen crouched beside the masked man, who now sat handcuffed to the porch rail, blood on his brow and flour still clinging to his clothes. Name's Curtis Dolly Tannen muttered, thumbing through the guy's wallet. Holy hell. Eli, this one's got a federal warrant in 3 states. He turned toward Izzy. You weren't exaggerating. You've got real fire on your tail. Izzy stood silently, arms wrapped around herself, knuckles white. Tannen looked her over, eyes softer now. You need protection. More than I can give. I'm calling it in. Thank you, Eli said, voice tight. Tannen nodded, then leaned in toward Dolly. You tell your boss he sent the wrong dogs. This town bites back. The adrenaline faded just before dawn. The kitchen was wrecked glass everywhere, flour like snow, a skillet embedded in the wall. Izzy stood frozen, staring at the mess breath, shallow. Her hands trembled. She didn't try to hide it. Eli approached, quiet. She didn't look at him. I shouldn't have come here, she whispered. I brought this to your children. To your home. You could have been. No, he said. Firm. You don't understand, she pressed, voice cracking. They won't stop. They'll keep sending more. And next time, Izzy. He turned her to face him. You didn't bring danger. You brought truth. And light. That kind of thing doesn't cause storms. It exposes them. She shook her head. You're risking your life. A voice cut through the air, small but strong. Izzy. It was Noah, pajama-clad, hair wild from sleep. He stood in the hallway holding Elsie's hand. Izzy tried to smile. I'm sorry I scared you, kiddo. Noah walked up, eyes glassy but clear. You didn't scare us. He reached out and hugged her. Tight. Elsie followed, wrapping her arms around Izzy's waist. You're our family, Noah whispered. Family doesn't leave when it gets hard. Izzy crumbled. Right there, in the middle of the wreckage, tears streaking her face, arms full of the children she'd tried to protect by leaving. Eli watched, then stepped forward, and wrapped all 3 of them in his arms. The sun rose hours later, painting gold across the shattered glass. Tannen's car was gone. The criminal had been taken into custody. The kitchen was still a mess, but there was something new in the air. Not just flour, not just salt. Belonging. Izzy swept the glass slowly, methodically, as if trying to reclaim the space. Eli stood in the doorway, coffee in hand. She looked at him and said, I've never been anyone's home before. He smiled. You're ours now. And in that moment, amid the ruined bruises and broken things, they stood in something stronger than fear. They stood in family. The fire in the brick oven crackled softly. Izzy sat cross-legged on the wooden floor of the kitchen, her back against the pantry door, fingers wrapped tightly around a chipped ceramic mug filled with lukewarm tea. Outside, the storm had passed, but a strange stillness lingered in the air, like the world was catching its breath after too much truth. Eli was on the other side of the room, quietly stacking wood near the hearth. Neither of them had said much since dinner. The kids were asleep, safe and warm upstairs. The dog snored faintly beneath the table, and yet something between them still stirred. A presence, a pause. I used to think ovens were the safest place in the world, Izzy said suddenly, her voice barely above a whisper. Eli looked up, surprised. When the heat was right, the dough would rise just so. Golden perfect. It was the only kind of control I had left. She stared into her mug like it held a memory. There was a man, she continued, before the yacht, before the chef's jacket, before I changed my name. Eli said nothing, just listened. He liked to pretend I was his. Only his. He didn't like questions, or locked doors, or when I cried. She closed her eyes. I got pregnant. I didn't tell anyone. I was saving money, planning to leave. I thought, maybe the baby would be my second chance. A long silence. Eli didn't move. One night I dropped a glass. He didn't even shout, just grabbed me, slammed me against the sink. I remember the sound of the water running, the smell of bleach, and the way the tile felt cold under my cheek. Her hands tightened around the mug. I lost the baby that night. She looked up at Eli, tears pooling in her eyes but refusing to fall. That's why I freeze when I hear running water. That's why I flinch when the faucet hisses, because I never got to say goodbye. Eli crossed the room slowly and sat beside her, not touching, just close enough that she could feel the steadiness of his breath. My wife, he said softly, used to leave notes in the bread box, random things, reminders, poems, once even a grocery list that just said, hope, patience, and pie crust. Izzy gave a breathy laugh, broken at the edges. She died before we could fix what we'd broken. We fought a lot that last year. I blamed her for being sick. She blamed me for trying to fix things that couldn't be fixed. He stared into the fire. But the last thing she ever wrote me, I found it the day after the funeral, tucked inside a recipe card. He paused. It said, if you love someone, really love them, let them be quiet. Let them break. Let them go if they need to. Then wait for the fire to become warmth again. Izzy looked at him. Neither of them said a word. He reached out gently, and she placed her hand in his. Not because she had to, but because in the flicker of the firelight, in that unspoken silence, she realized he was the first man who ever sat with her pain instead of trying to fix it. The next morning, the smell of cinnamon and sea salt filled the house. Izzy was already elbow-deep in dough when Eli walked into the kitchen. 20 pies, he asked, rubbing his eyes. 20, she confirmed, flour on her cheek like war paint. The orphanage downtown lost their sponsor. Kids haven't had a homemade dessert in 3 months. You sure you're up for it? I'm not sure about anything, she said, kneading with rhythm, but I know how to feed people who've been forgotten. Noah entered a moment later, holding a jar of sugar. Can I help fold the crusts, only if you want the pretty edges, Izzy teased. Elsie skipped in, dragging the rolling pin. I'll do the hearts. Eli leaned against the counter, watching his little army form. Flour on the walls, salt water in the butter. Tiny hearts pressed into the top of every pie. By noon, the kitchen smelled like memory. By 1, 20 pies sat on cooling racks. By 2, they were boxed and loaded into Eli's truck. At the orphanage, the reaction was immediate. Children came running, wide-eyed, hopeful. One girl with pigtails whispered, "Is it really for us?" Izzy knelt, opened the box, and handed her the first slice. "It's yours, sweetheart. Every crumb." A few of the older kids stared at her in silence. Then one boy, maybe 12, muttered, "You smell like a mom." Izzy laughed, choked by it, overwhelmed. "Is that a good thing or a bad thing?" "Good," he said shyly. "Real good." By the time they returned home, the sun was starting to set, casting amber light across the fields. Izzy stepped onto the porch, wiping her hands on her apron. Eli joined her, coffee in hand. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. They sat together side by side, watching the sky burn gold. And as the light faded and the chill settled in, he reached out again. Not for answers. Not for promises. Just her hand. And this time, she didn't hesitate. In the quiet that followed, Izzy whispered almost to herself, "Maybe it's not about forgetting the fire." Eli looked over. "No." She shook her head. "Maybe it's about learning how to bake with it." He smiled, and in the distance, a pie crust cooled on the windowsill, still warm, still whole. The call came just after sunrise. Eli was fixing the hinges on the barn door when Izzy stepped out onto the porch phone. In hand, a strange stillness on her face, like the kind you wear when the world tilts under your feet, but you're trying not to fall. "They found him," she said. Eli straightened. "Who?" She swallowed. The man behind it all. The yacht, the money, the silence. FBI tracked him crossing into international waters 2 weeks ago, but the wire transfer I flagged the one that paid for the girls' training. They traced it back to him. Eli stepped closer. "They want me," she added quietly, "as a witness, as the one who broke the code. They said my report blew the case open. I'd be protected. Testify. Maybe help save a dozen other girls who never got a chance." He looked at her. Really looked at her. Not the flower-covered baker. Not the frightened woman with past ghosts. But the warrior in an apron who had turned pain into purpose. "And what did you say?" She gave a small, shaky smile. "I said yes." Eli nodded. "Then we stand with you." That afternoon, as the news spread, folks came by in quiet waves, leaving casseroles, pies, a few jars of pickled okra, and hand-scrawled notes that said things like, "You're braver than most men I know," or "Salt water," or "Not your pie saved more than hunger." But one gift stood apart. It came from Ms. Eleanor, the white-haired widow from 3 farms over. She moved like wind-blown lace and smelled faintly of lavender soap and lemon balm. I heard she said, stepping into the kitchen uninvited, like she had every right to be part of something good. Izzy blinked, confused. Heard what that the world finally caught up to the devil, and that you're not running anymore. Before Izzy could reply, Eleanor set a large box down on the kitchen table. Old, wrapped in floral cloth, tied with a ribbon that had yellowed over time. "I wore this the day I married my Henry." Eleanor said, eyes gleaming. "We didn't have much, but I felt like the Queen of Carolina for one afternoon." Izzy hesitated. "I miss Eleanor, I'm not." "I know," the old woman said, raising a hand. "But listen, sweetheart, if you're gonna stay, if you're gonna build a life here, let it begin in light, not fear. Wear it when you're ready, not when you're told." Then, with a wink, she turned and left. Izzy stood there, speechless, staring at the box like it might explode. Later that night, she opened it, and inside, beneath layers of tissue and memory, was the softest white she'd ever seen. The next day, Eli asked her to walk with him. They went to the orchard where the peach trees were just starting to bud. Spring still wore her winter coat, but the promise of color danced on every branch. He didn't say much at first, just walked beside her, hands in his pockets. Then he stopped. "Can I ask you something?" he said, turning to face her. She braced herself, but his eyes, steady and warm, told her this wasn't a bomb. It was a seed. "I'm not asking for forever," he said gently. "Not yet. Maybe not ever." Izzy raised a brow. "That's the worst proposal I've ever heard." He chuckled. "It's not a proposal." Then more quietly, "Would you consider being their mom officially? Not just the one who bakes and tucks them in, but the one they know will stay." Izzy's breath caught. I'm not perfect, she whispered. They've had perfect ripped away, he replied. They don't need perfect. They need you. Silence. A breeze rustled the branches above them. Then Izzy smiled soft and sure, and said the only words that mattered, yes. The following morning, when Eli and the kids came down for breakfast, the smell of cinnamon and citrus filled the house. On the table sat 3 folded aprons freshly sewn. Each one had a name embroidered by hand. Noah, Elsie, Eli, and beneath each name, in smaller thread, loved by Izzy. Noah picked his up first, running his fingers over the stitching. You sewed these, he asked. Izzy nodded, cheeks a little pink. You put your name on us, Elsie whispered. No, Izzy corrected, crouching down between them. I put your names on me. She looked up at Eli, who hadn't said a word yet. His eyes were full. You didn't have to sew anything, he murmured. I know, she said. But love should be worn, not just felt. He stepped closer, and for the first time they held each other, not in fear or grief or trembling hope, but in quiet understanding. No kiss, no ceremony, just arms around each other in a kitchen where light poured through every crack like grace. Outside, Miss Eleanor's dress still waited in its box. It wasn't time yet, but it would be. Soon. Ratsan sang toi se bat jau ngai chuang. 9. The last wave. Bam sat outline moi kapanhat. Sin lui jai se la chuang kau traunhat. Noi kathi tran joy mat. Truk tiep voi bong toi vachi and thang hong bong. Vu luk ma bang long nangoi. The black SUV rolled down the main road like a shadow swallowing sunlight. It was too quiet for a Tuesday. No kids riding their bikes, no screen doors slamming, no distant sound of a radio playing old Willie Nelson songs, just the low hum of something wrong approaching. Izzy stood behind the front window of the bakery, hands trembling slightly, as she watched the man step out of the vehicle. Tailored suit, sunglasses, the same cold smirk from 1,000 nightmares. He didn't need to speak. She knew him. The man who once bought her like a thing. Now he was here in her town with a leather briefcase and a folded paper in hand. Sheriff Wade stepped outside firsthand, resting on the butt of his holstered gun. Calm, measured. But his voice had the weight of steel. This town's private property. State jurisdiction. The man smiled, slow and reptilian. I'm here on legal grounds. You have a resident, Isabel Bennett, formerly known as. She's not formerly anything Wade cut in. She's Izzy, head baker at Morgan and Bennett, member of our Sunday pie auction, sponsor of the local orphanage, and she ain't going nowhere. The man lifted the paper. A federally notarized guardianship revocation, he said smoothly. Filed under sealed terms due to medical instability and flight risk. I have every right to reclaim custody. He might as well have slapped her. Izzy stumbled back, inside heart pounding in her throat. They're trying to take me? Noah stood frozen. Elsie started to cry. But Eli, he walked straight to her, cupped her face in both hands, and said low, steady, "They can't take what already belongs here." Then, like something from an old western, the town rose. One by one, people stepped out of their shops. From the diner, the hardware store, the schoolhouse, an old man with a walker, a teenage girl still wearing her band uniform, a woman in a wheelchair holding a protest sign made of cardboard that just said, "Let her bake." Sheriff Wade raised his voice. You came with paper. We came with people. The man's smile finally cracked. You're obstructing federal custody. Eli stepped forward, eyes blazing. No, he said. We're honoring human decency. Then turning to the crowd, he lifted his voice. She may not have roots in our cemetery, but she's planted seeds in every oven and every heart in this town. That makes her ours. Silence. Then applause, thunderous, defiant applause. Even the wind seemed to join in, rattling the windows of the bakery like clapping hands. The man tried to protest, dialing his phone, barking legal codes into the receiver. But it was too late. Because just then, a black Suburban pulled up behind his SUV, and out stepped 2 federal agents in Navy windbreakers. Mr. Granger once said, "We have a warrant for your arrest. Human trafficking. Fraud. Witness intimidation. Your extradition deal just got revoked." His face turned gray. The paper fell from his hand like ash. Izzy watched as they cuffed him and read him his rights. She didn't cry, didn't tremble, just stood with her chin high, flanked by the man who loved her and the children who called her home. Before they placed Granger in the vehicle, she stepped forward just enough to look him in the eye. "You paid for my silence," she said, voice calm, deadly clear. "But you never earned my voice, and now I get to use it." He didn't say a word, didn't need to. The doors slammed. The agents drove off, and her town exhaled. That night, the bakery stayed open late, not for business, for healing. Neighbors brought food stories, old family recipes written in cursive on stained cards. Children laughed again. Someone played a guitar. The fire pit roared. Izzy stood at the back counter rolling dough when Elsie tugged her apron. "Was that man gonna hurt you?" Izzy knelt down. "Once, but not anymore. Because we scared him away," Izzy smiled. "Because we stood together." Eli stepped beside her, holding 2 mugs of cider. He passed her one, raised his like a toast. "To the last wave," he said. Izzy tilted her head. "The last wave," he nodded. "The last time fear tried to drag you under, and the first time you stood on solid ground." She clinked her mug to his. And with the bakery full of laughter and the smell of cinnamon in the air, she whispered to herself, "I'm not afraid of water anymore." The sun rose soft and slow over Morgan's Bluff, painting the horizon in honey and hope. Izzy stood on the porch of the bakery in a crisp white apron, her hands dusted with flour, watching the tide pull in and out, like the rhythm of her own breath. This town had once been a stranger. Now it was stitched into her soul. A folded paper sat in her pocket, the letter from the Department of Homeland Security. Provisional residency granted. Legal work status approved. Witness protection lifted. She was free. Not just safe, but seen. Inside the bakery, chaos bloomed like wildflowers. 20 pies, each crust, perfectly braided, lined the counter. Children from the orphanage ran in and out of the kitchen with sugar-streaked cheeks. Miss June hummed an old church hymn as she whipped meringue. Eli stood at the sink, sleeves rolled up, washing a mountain of mixing bowls. "I thought you said this was a small event," he teased. Izzy wiped her brow. "I said small guest list, not small pies." "Right," he grinned. "You're feeding half the town." "Only the half with hearts big enough to show up," she said. Noah walked in holding a clipboard. "The reading starts at 3, the vows at 4. Sunset by 5:15. Oh, and Reverend Milton wants to bless the pie table." Izzy raised an eyebrow. "The pies are getting a blessing." Noah nodded solemnly. "Apparently, they've become a symbol." She paused. A symbol of what he didn't hesitate. Of what happens when broken people feed each other. The beach behind the bluff was dressed in white folding chairs, seashell centerpieces, and rows of fairy lights strung between driftwood posts. There was no altar, no archway, just the wide-open sky and the sound of the waves. Guests arrived barefoot in jeans and sundresses, some holding hands, others holding memories. There were no bridesmaids, no ring-bearer, just Izzy walking down the sand alone and smiling. She wore a simple linen dress dyed the color of cream. Her hair was pulled back, a sprig of rosemary tucked behind her ear, Eleanor's idea. And in her hands, she carried a pie, not a bouquet. A pie. When she reached the front, Eli stepped toward her blue shirt, khakis, no tie, but eyes that looked like home. "Before we do this," he whispered, "I just want to say, this isn't a rescue story." She smiled. "No, he said. "This is a recipe story. And you were never missing ingredients. You just needed the right kitchen. They didn't exchange rings. They exchanged aprons, each stitched with the words, Morgan and Bennett, bakers of hope." The crowd erupted when Elsie and Noah read aloud from a scroll made of recycled parchment. "My dad says salt brings out sweetness, and hard water makes dough stronger." That's why this pie matters, because it reminds us that even pain, when baked with love, can feed 100 souls. From that moment, the name stuck. Saltwater pie wasn't just dessert anymore. It became a movement. News spread. First, the local paper Ex-Trafficking Survivor turns Baker Heals Community. Then a food blog picked it up, Salt and Sugar, the Pie That Rebuilt a Town. By the end of the week, a New York Times feature was already scheduled. Not for the crime, not for the courtroom, but for the pie. People wrote letters. Strangers came by the dozens. Some just stood in line to shake Izzy's hand. Others brought recipes of their own grandmother's cobblers, auntie's spice cakes, secrets scrawled on napkins from 4 states away. Each story different, each story hungry. And Izzy, she fed them, not just with crust and filling, but with presence, with safety, with proof that love doesn't rescue, it rebuilds. That night, back at the house, Izzy stood in the kitchen barefoot, watching the steam curl from the last pie of the day. Eli came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "We did it," he said. She leaned back into his chest. "No, they did it. We just kept the oven warm." A soft voice piped up from the hallway. Mom Izzy turned. Noah stood there in his pajamas, blinking. "I had a bad dream," he mumbled. She reached for him, pulling him close. "Well," she said, "you know what? Helps with dreams." He shook his head. "Pie for breakfast." He grinned. Outside, the moon shone down on a bakery by the sea, and inside, a family stood in a warm kitchen, surrounded by crusts and crumbs and the scent of healing. The story wasn't a fairy tale, but it was a feast. And for the first time in her life, Izzy understood. You don't need a castle to live happily ever after. You just need a recipe worth sharing. The morning came soft and golden, brushing the windows, with the kind of light that made everything look like forgiveness. Izzy was already in the kitchen when Elsie tiptoed in, still rubbing sleep from her eyes. The little girl climbed up on the stool, blinking at the mound of dough resting under a cotton cloth. "Are we baking this early?" she whispered. Izzy smiled, her apron already dusted with flour. "Only on the best days." She lifted the cloth gently. The dough had risen perfectly plump and ready, like it had been waiting for something special. "Is it someone's birthday?" Elsie asked. "No," Izzy said, kneading slowly. "Just a quiet day to say thank you." "To who?" "To the world, for giving second chances, and little hands like yours." Elsie grinned, then looked thoughtful. "Can I ask you something?" "Always." "What does my name mean?" Izzy paused. "It means, God is my oath. A promise," she answered softly. "A name like that means someone wanted you to know you're never forgotten." The little girl looked down at her hands. "Did you choose your name?" she asked after a moment. Izzy hesitated, and then, kneeling down so she was eye level with her daughter, she spoke gently, truthfully. "No," she said. "Someone once gave it to me, but for a long time, I didn't feel like I deserved it. Why? Because I didn't know who I was. I thought names were about what people wanted you to be." She touched Elsie's heart with a flour-dusted fingertip. "But real names, They're about who you become, even when no one's watching. Elsie blinked. So what does your name mean? Izzy smiled, tears burning the corners of her eyes. It means I'm still rising. By mid-morning, the sun poured into the kitchen like honey, and the whole family was up. Noah was mixing cinnamon sugar. Eli was assembling pie boxes, always folding the last corner too tight. Izzy laid out 3 aprons, hers Eli's, and a tiny one for Elsie. Then she brought out a 4th piece of dough. "What's that one?" for Eli asked. "For writing," she said. They gathered around as Izzy flattened the dough into a large circle. "We each get to write 1 word," she said. "A word that matters, that we want to bake into our story." Elsie went first. With a butter knife, she traced the word, hope. "It's the first word I heard you say when you hugged me," she said. "When I was scared." Noah stepped forward. He thought for a moment, then carefully wrote, safe. "Because it's how this house feels," he said. Eli looked at Izzy, then leaned over and etched, home. And then it was her turn. She stared at the dough for a long moment. Then with hands that had once trembled under chains, but now shaped futures, she traced a single word. Begin. Eli reached over and touched her hand. "Why that one?" he asked. She didn't answer right away. Just looked around the room at flour on the floor, laughter in the air, crusts cooling on the windowsill. "Because I never want to think of this as an ending," she whispered. "Only a beginning." That evening, they baked the word pie and set it on the front counter of Morgan and Bennett under a glass dome. A handwritten sign read, "This is our family recipe. Taste it with your heart." Locals came in pointing to the dough script, whispering their own meanings. Some left notes beside the pie stories of grief, of healing, of finding light in places they never thought to look. And with each slice, Izzy felt something settle in her. Not closure, but belonging. Not erasure of pain, but the honoring of it. One day a woman came into the shop holding an old photograph. She pointed to a face in the picture barely recognizable, just a girl with hollow eyes and a fake smile. "I think this was you," the woman said. Izzy looked. "It was," the woman continued. "I was in the same shelter once. But I never made it out like you did." Izzy walked around the counter and took her hand. "I didn't make it out," she said. "I made it through. And now I'm making pie. Would you like a slice?" The woman nodded, tears falling fast. And that night, Izzy added a new word to the next pie worth. On the very last page of her recipe book, Izzy wrote a note to herself. "The name doesn't matter, not really. What matters is who you feed, and who you choose to feed with. I thought I'd lost everything. But it turns out I was just preheating." That night, as stars scattered across the sky like sugar, Eli sat on the porch with her arm around her shoulder. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if you never washed ashore?" he asked. Izzy looked up at the night. "I think about it every day," she whispered. "And then I kiss my kids goodnight and roll out pie dough, and I thank the tide for being strong enough to carry me here." He kissed the top of her head. "You are the tide," he said. "And you carried us, too." The oven light glowed warm in the window behind them. Inside, a pie cooled, beside 4 names, etched in flour. Hope. Safe. Home. Begin. And in the silence of that coastal town, the wind didn't just smell like salt and sugar. It smelled like legacy. And now, if you've stayed with us all the way to the end, thank you. Thank you for opening your heart to this story. Maybe it reminded you of someone. Maybe it reminded you of you. We'd love to know where in the world are you watching from. Drop a little comment below and let us know what part of this story touched you most. It's always a joy hearing from you. And if you'd like more stories like this, stories about kindness, about healing, about the quiet power of love, feel free to subscribe and join this growing little community we're building here. No pressure, just a warm welcome if you do. Above all, from the bottom of our hearts, thank you for your time. In a world that moves so fast, the fact that you paused and listened, it means more than you know. Until next time, take care of yourself, and never underestimate the power of something as simple as pie.